Hello, everyone. Welcome to Double Take. My name's Jim Ryan, and I'd like to start with some thank yous. First of all, thank you to all of you who are here to listen to these amazing stories. Second, I want to thank some of my colleagues from the President's Office who helped organize this event, Darcy Wigand, Gracelyn Spates, Jaden Evans, and Matt Weber in particular. And last but not least, I want to thank our storytellers. It is not easy to stand up in front of a crowd and tell your story. And so I'm grateful for your willingness to do it and for your courage in doing it. We have been doing Double Take here for 5 years. Matt Weber and I worked together at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and we started Double Take there about 10 years ago, and then brought it to UVA when we came here. And the reason is pretty simple. I really believe in the power of stories as a way to build bridges and as a way to build connections. I think if you want to understand someone else, you need to know their story, or at least one of their stories. And tonight, you're going to hear stories from 7 members of our community, and you'll learn something about them. My hope is that in addition to learning about their stories, is that it reminds you that everyone in this room, the person sitting to your left, the person sitting to your right, has a story. And my guess is it probably is not what you expect. And so my hope, and one of the real reasons why we have continued to host these events, is that it will inspire you to share your story with others, but also inspire you to ask others to share their stories with you. If we all did a little bit more of that, I'm sure we would be an even stronger community. So with that, I am going to turn over the mic to our first storyteller.
Thank you, President Ryan. Good evening. I'm Malo Hudson. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture. The story I want to tell you tonight is about change, and even though change is hard, it's incredibly a beautiful thing. I didn't grow up with my father, but my grandfather was my hero. He was the one that taught me everything. My grandfather was born August 6, 1935, in McGee, Mississippi. McGee, Mississippi is a town of about 4,000 people, and coincidentally, many of the early settlers came from Virginia. My grandfather grew up in the Jim Crow South. He ended up getting a 3rd grade education, not because he wasn't smart, but because he didn't want to go back to school because of the way he was treated. When he was old enough, he finally joined the military. When he could join the military, he joined it. He served for 21 years, and he joined the Army, and he was in the Division of Engineering. So he's in the Department of Engineering within the Army. And I realized much later, but not then, that my grandfather also went through a lot of trauma and pain. But he served in the military. He ended up doing 3 tours of duty in Vietnam. He didn't talk a whole lot about that. And when I was growing up, I wanted to be with him all the time. He was the first person to tell me about life. He was the first person to teach me how to tie a tie. He bought me my first bike. I wear an analog watch to this day because of him. I love the way he smelled, his aftershave. But he was a man who didn't say a whole lot, and I was a talker. So I was that little kid that would say, "Granddaddy, how come this? Granddaddy, how come that?" And now that I'm a father myself, you want to go down to the basement and go in the corner and just take a nap? Well, I would be that kid that would find him and say, "Granddaddy," and he was just like, and to this day I see my kids, sometimes they find me, and sometimes I wake up and they're just staring at me, and I wonder what that means. The parents out there know what I'm talking about. But right when you get in that deep sleep, they come. So I was attached to my grandfather. And the things I remember the most about him is he would take me fishing. He liked to watch MASH, so I'd sit and watch MASH as a little kid. We watched Hee Haw. How many people know Hee Haw? Please raise your, yes. We watched Hee Haw, so you imagine a little 5, 6-year-old boy watching Hee Haw. And we also watched Chips. I thought Eric Estrada was the most coolest guy ever. For those of you who don't know, Chips was about 2 California Highway Patrol officers that would save people from burning cars and all those things. So I wanted to be a Chips officer. I thought when I grow up, I want to ride a motorcycle and be in the Highway Patrol, California Highway Patrol. I ended up being a dean, obviously. It's equally rewarding, but not nearly as exciting. So that was, but the thing I loved about my grandfather is that he would just make time for me. And one story that I want to tell is how when my friends came home from college, my grandmother goes, "Hello, Bob." And other people in my family call me Bobby, and people are like, "Why do they call you Bob and your name is Malo?" Like, that doesn't compute. Well, when I was little, I went with my grandfather everywhere, literally to the grocery store, and he was in the aisles doing other things that left me in the frozen food section. And so I was there shivering, and I was trying to say, "Granddaddy, Malo's cold," but I kept saying, "Bobo, cold." And he couldn't figure it out for a while, and I was thinking in my head of like, just get me out of here, out of this frozen food section. But I ended up getting the nickname Bob. And so that was one of the things that was always wonderful. But as time went along, my grandfather was the first, when I got accepted to Berkeley, first person in my family to go to college, he was incredibly proud. And we didn't have money to drive up to Berkeley, and I couldn't fly up there, so he said, I'll take you. But he shows up in his motorhome. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's gonna take me all the way to college from Southern California, all the way up to Berkeley in a motorhome. But my grandfather was wise. And one of the things that he was doing is he knew that we needed to spend time together. And so I was thinking we're just gonna go up the one freeway and just get up there. But we took time to go all the way up there. We would sit and talk, we had campfire, and then finally that last day I was just thinking, I just wanna get to the university. And when he dropped me off, he was nervous. He said, "You have all these things, but it's really hectic. Lots of things are going on." And he just said, "I'm so proud of you." And he gave me a big hug, and there wasn't a lot to, couldn't really say goodbye the proper way. But as he started to drive off, I just did this with my thumbs up, meaning I got this, right? And so that's something I always do when I think about things getting hard. I think about his life and what he went through and what he meant for me. But as I fast forward through my life, I left Berkeley, went to MIT, then was a professor, and then many years later taught at Berkeley and then taught at Columbia, and UVA called. And UVA said, "We have this dean position, we think you'd be a good fit, would you be interested?" And I thought, I love New York, like I'm an urbanist, I love New York, I had a great life in New York with my family and whatnot. And then I started thinking about my grandfather. And I started thinking about all the people that came before him that made it possible for me to be where I am. I had saw the leadership that was here at UVA. I knew where I was in 2017. Right outside these doors, what had happened. My daughter is 12 now, my son is 9. They were 6 and 3 at the time. And they were asking me, "Daddy, what's happening?" And I remember trying to explain it, and they just knew it was bad. They didn't know, they couldn't fully comprehend. My daughter could comprehend a little bit more than my son. And even though I loved New York, and I loved having a great life there, my grandfather spoke to me. And I thought about his 3rd grade education. I thought of him growing up in the segregated South of McGee, Mississippi, and I knew I had to come. I had to come because this is bigger than us. And today, his grandson sits inside the rotunda in front of you at Thomas Jefferson's University to say that change is hard, but change can be a beautiful thing. And so I'm humbled by the opportunity. I think where UVA is going is a wonderful thing, and I just think about my grandfather all the time. Even when things are hard, I think about what he went through, and I'm just so fortunate to be here. So that's my story.
Hello, everyone. My name is Depisha, and I am somebody who has a lot of beliefs. One of my beliefs is that as individuals, we are not defined by our biggest accomplishments, but rather by the small mosaic of seemingly uninteresting moments. I think that these moments allow us to be who we are today. I'm also of the belief that who we are today isn't necessarily who we were yesterday and doesn't have to be who we will be tomorrow. I could tell you the story of how I got to speak at the United Nations, but I think it's far more interesting that at 6 years old, I decided that I didn't have a favorite color because I liked them all equally. I think that says a lot more about me. So today, I want to tell you a series of mundane moments that make me who I am today. My mom and I migrated to the United States in 2009, just in time for me to start the 1st grade. And like most immigrant students, I was placed in ESL classes, English as a second language. And despite my extremely thick Nepali accent and high credits to Mickey Mouse, I spoke pretty good English, and I could read and write to a certain extent. So my mom asked that I be tested out of ESL. I went ahead and I took the test. And I don't know if you know this, I'm kind of a genius, so I passed this test flying colors. You know, my English teacher is so incredibly shocked. She was so shocked and in such disbelief that she called me a cheater. I'd never been called a cheater before, and I'm not sure at that time I really understood what the word meant. But by the way that she instructed me to the principal's office, I was sure that it was not a good thing. That day, I arrived home, teary-eyed, to my mom. And when I told her the story, she became furious. I don't know if you've ever seen an angry mom, but it is one mighty sight. The next day, she and all 5'2" of her marched into my school and ripped them a new one. I mean, she used words that I didn't understand then and I surely don't understand now, and that's okay. And at the end of it, she pulled me aside and said, "I've always taught you to be respectful, and respect is so incredibly valuable, but it is just as important that you learn to advocate for yourself." She was my first advocate. In the 4th grade, I got my first B. And I remember sitting in the bus, holding this piece of paper, holding back tears. And I got home and I give my mom this piece of paper. I'm shaking, I'm like breaking down, ready to cry. She looks at this paper and she looks at me with just concern and confusion because my mom had never actually told me that I needed to get all A's. I, along the line somewhere, had decided that A's on a report card was what defined me. She looked at me and asked me a question that she asked me to this day and asked me so many times since then. Did you try your best? I nodded yes. And since then, we've never really discussed grades. We instead discuss whether I tried and the effort that I made, because trying takes courage, and we value that. Another thing of my household was that we were an open-door household. And no, that does not mean that I didn't get to lock my doors. It just means that anyone and everyone was always welcomed in our house. There were times that my mom worked 4 jobs to keep us afloat, and we couldn't afford things, but we never turned anyone away. So when she came home one day and asked if I was willing to donate my sleeping bag to a random man that she'd met, I said yes. There was no hesitation. This is just what we did. We helped where we could. That night, we drove an hour out to the Walmart parking lot in which she worked, and I met this kind and gentle man. He was so sweet, and while we gave him all of these things that we'd scavenged from our apartment, he just said thank you. I'm not sure much more about that interaction. I was quite young. But I know that for months after, my mom would always pack something just in case she ran into him. The last story that I'm going to tell you might not seem mundane, but my mom promises that this was the simplest decision that she's ever made. We are Bhutanese refugees, and there came a time in our resettlement story where we had the choice of applying to resettle in Nepal or coming abroad. Staying in Nepal is the easier choice. We spoke the language, my mom had made all these relationships. It was easier to navigate. But coming to the United States meant that I, her daughter, got a chance at truly choosing who I wanted to be. We often take for granted that in this country we have the opportunity of choice. We wake up every day and we choose who we want to be today and the things that we want to do. My mom's most mundane decision led to her losing everything in order for me to have everything. My family was stripped of their rights to decide who and what they wanted to be. They were forcibly removed from a land that they had called home for decades, for the language that they spoke and for the culture that they chose to uphold. My mom lost her chance at an education. My aunts and uncles lost their childhood. My grandparents lost everything that they had worked for. They lost their livelihoods. And for more than 20 years, they were boiled down to the simple term of refugee. And I too was born into that term. I too had that title for many years, and due to extraordinary circumstances, I now have the ability to choose who I am every day. I have the ability to choose what defines me. I believe that we are a reflection not only of the decisions that we make, but of the decisions made by those around us. My mom wakes up every single day, and despite the circumstances, she chooses to be compassionate, to be kind, to be an advocate, to be selfless. And I, on most days, choose to be an advocate, to be kind, to lead with compassion, to be a little bit selfish and a lot less selfless than she could be. But in this country, where I can choose to be anything. Without a doubt, each and every day, I will always choose to be my mother's daughter. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Charles, and when I was 13, I was diagnosed with papillary thyroid cancer. When my parents first gave me the news at our kitchen table, I can still remember my first two thoughts. The first, will somebody please explain to me what a thyroid is? And the second, what do we do now? Over the 8 years since, I've been called a cancer survivor, a Make-A-Wish kid, a childhood cancer courageous kid. But to me, none of these titles have felt like they fit. They just don't feel like they describe me. So when I was first diagnosed, I chose to keep it a secret. I didn't tell anybody because I couldn't process it. Cancer was like a secret society, and I was a die-hard member until Relay for Life at the end of my 8th grade year. For those who don't know, Relay is a charity walkathon event that fundraises for cancer research and treatment. And after a long day of walking laps, eating copious amounts of popsicles, playing soccer, I chose to leave the comfort of my secret society and share my diagnosis with my friends and with my teachers. At the end of the event, Relay puts on a slideshow of cancer survivors to remind everybody who we fundraise for. And this year, I was one of them. Now, at this point, I still had not told any of my close friends who cared about me about my diagnosis, and in hindsight, a small warning might have been courteous. But regardless, the moment came, and I remember the image in almost a comical light. I'm sitting here, crisscross applesauce in the grass, and up on the slideshow screen is this little 4'10" 8th grader with his cute bow tie and big wide grin and the words, "Cancer Survivor." Everyone I knew just found out at the exact same time. And all I can remember from the rest of that night are countless hugs, tears, and the overwhelming perception of oppressive pity. I suddenly felt that my entire identity had become that of a cancer patient, and that was all that anybody could ever see in me. As a high schooler with cancer, I was in a bit of a tailspin. I was a hormonal adolescent who had yet to hit his growth spurt, and arguably still hasn't. I'm 5'10" in a family of 6'2" Germans. And I was already grumpy about that. Cancer did not help. I felt like I had lost my autonomy, and I was out of control of my own body. Enter Ask Childhood Cancer Foundation and their Moving Forward program, which paired pediatric cancer patients with a personal trainer at the YMCA for free for a year. Soon, I would be buff and short and grumpy. But Ask wasn't only for gains. Ask was also full of kids that I could relate to. I met a friend named Olivia who had the exact same surgery as me, involving the complete removal of both of our thyroids. We just don't have the organ anymore. And so she texted me one day, completely out of the blue, zero context, only 2 texts. "Dude, where's my thyroid?" I don't know. I like to imagine in thyroid heaven somewhere. Olivia didn't pity me because Olivia also had thyroid cancer. I felt safer in community, and for the first time in my life, I started speaking about my diagnosis. Through Ask, I spoke at fundraisers, campaigned on social media for their programs, lobbied for pediatric cancer funding with my mom at the Virginia General Assembly. I never went any deeper than to share I have cancer, but I allowed myself to publicly wear the title of a cancer survivor in the name of a cause that was important to me. I liked being able to use my story to benefit other kids like me, but I was quickly confronted with a single glaring issue. I was dissatisfied with my own story. I felt like a side character in a story about cancer. The term cancer survivor is supposed to be something empowering, but for me, I felt reduced to nothing more than a diagnosis. I wanted to be more than just a cancer story. 3 years ago, I set off to UVA, determined to write a Charles story. I joined clubs, I founded a club, I became a powerlifter and a coach. But more important to me than any of these is when I became a Camp Kesem counselor. Camp Kesem is a free summer camp for kids whose parents have cancer, completely student-run, organized, and funded here at UVA. For me, the mission was personal, because in my story, while the cancer survivor was supported through treatment, there was an 8-year-old little brother trying to process the diagnosis at the exact same time. And who can expect an 8-year-old to understand that his brother both has cancer and is going to be okay? These are just incompatible thoughts in the mind of a child. So I became a camp counselor to a cabin of 8 to 10-year-old boys who were a joy and a nightmare all at the same time. At Kesem, we exclusively go by camp nicknames, so to me, they were Sheep and Cray Cray and Cheeky Monkey, and to them, I was Snap. And on the third day of camp, my kids were tasked with drawing on a paper plate a picture that makes them think about Camp Kesem. Sheep drew Spider-Man. Cray Cray drew Carl, our caterpillar mascot, jumping off a diving board into the pool. And Spidey, a camper I've grown very close with in my 3 years with Camp Kesem, drew the exact scene of his mother telling him that his dad had passed away from multiple myeloma. The image is scarred into my brain. Brown marker, Spidey's mom sitting at the kitchen table, head in her hands. Spidey still has his backpack on as he's just getting home from school, not knowing the news he's about to receive. His sister's already upstairs in her room crying. When Spidey shared his picture, it broke me. It broke me because Spidey remembers every single detail of that moment, in the same way that I remember every single detail of my diagnosis. I remember my walk down the stairs. I remember exactly where my dad was sitting and where my mom was sitting, and I remember the exact chair that I pulled out, not knowing that my life was about to irreparably change. I remember my feeling of shock, and I can only imagine Spidey's. To this point, I had only ever used my cancer diagnosis as a title, cancer survivor. At Kesem, my cancer experience enabled me to empathize deeply with my kids. Empathy is heartbreak. It is heartbreaking to hear my own pain reflected back at me because it's pain that I wouldn't wish on anybody. And I quickly realized that my empathy gave me the motivation and the passion to make an impact on these kids. But they didn't need a cancer story. They just needed me, as I was. I see my story in a different light now. I used to see only the impact that cancer has had on me. But now, I see the gifts that I have gained from my cancer experience. Empathy, a motivation to help, an appreciation for life. My story, the Charles story, will be the way that I use these gifts to impact the people around me. A little over a month ago, I was asked to stand in front of all of you and tell a story, and I'll be honest, I immediately asked myself, are we going to tell them a cancer story? No. I hope you won't walk out of here tonight thinking that you heard a cancer story, because that's not my story. I don't want you to call me a cancer survivor, even if I'm proud to be one. I just want you to call me Charles, a Camp Kesem director, a powerlifter, a student, a son, a brother, a cousin, a storyteller. Thank you. Who am I going to next?
Hello. Day one was okay. I survived. We didn't do too much that would get me disappointed, but I need an organization system of some sorts. Parentheses, if there is one. All caps. I didn't cry. I had to pee in the woods at like 11 at night. Parentheses, it was pitch black. That was an excerpt from my first Outward Bound journal entry. And Outward Bound was the experience where I spent 3 weeks on the Appalachian Trail backpacking and canoeing. No plumbing, no technology, not glamping. So, hello, my name is Tasia Courts, and I'm a fourth-year American Studies major here at the University of Virginia, and I'm from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Today, I will be telling you guys about my time on the Appalachian Trail and what I gained from that experience. An experience that I am so, so glad that I did, but would never, ever do again. Seriously. So, Outward Bound is an outdoor education organization, and my high school offered scholarships for 3-week programs. So I decided to apply to the 3-week backpacking and canoeing trip. But when it was time to apply, I really went back and forth with myself. And whenever I had asked my friends at school or my mom, I was very, very quickly written off. I had received their message loud and clear. Activities like backpacking, sailing, and canoeing were not the choice activities of my community. In other words, that's some white people stuff. So, after a great deal of reflection and prayer, I decided to apply. Why, you might ask? Other people were definitely asking me, and I was definitely asking myself. Honestly, all I know is that I felt this intense spiritual pull to embark on a once-in-a-lifetime journey of self-discovery. So I entered into high school, and I had a pretty difficult transition. I was entering into a suburban private high school, which was the polar opposite of my predominantly Black and Hispanic high school, which was lower income, that I would have been attending. So I was really unprepared for how that transition would impact my sense of self. But I saw Outward Bound as a potential retreat or escape from everyone else's notions of who I was meant to be. So I finally decided to submit my application. I interviewed, and I got it. Yay. So I later found out that I was the only person that applied. Thus, I had already begun learning my lessons from this entire experience. Lesson number 1 is that you won't get it if you don't apply, parentheses, yourself. In life, you can't count yourself out before you even put your name in the hat, especially if others are trying to talk you out of your dreams. What if I had let myself or other people talk me out of it? I simply would not be the person that I am today. And I simply would not be transported back to the beautiful woods of Maine whenever I'm asked to close my eyes and imagine the place where I feel most safe and at peace. So let's get into the trip. Outward Bound, Appalachian Trail, no plumbing, no showers, sometimes an outhouse, no technology, no entertainment outside of my group mates, my Bible, and this here journal. So on the first day, when we arrived at base, our instructors, Katie and Tucker, led a demonstration for us on comfort zones. And they had used traffic signals as metaphors and hula hoops as visual aids for us. So the smallest green hula hoop represented our comfort zones, which is where we spend the majority of our time and where we know exactly what to expect. A slightly larger yellow hula hoop surrounded the green hula hoop, and it represented our stretch zones, which is where we begin the process of learning new things and exploring newer territories. Then finally, the largest red hula hoop represents our panic zone, which is the area where we're fully out of our comfort zone and we're completely navigating uncharted territory. I realized during this demonstration that most of my next 3 weeks would be spent in the stretch and panic zones. So that brings me to my next lesson, which is no progress can be made from your comfort zone. When we're comfortable, we are not growing. In our comfort zones, we're meant to feel safe, at peace, restored. But if we stay there too long, they can end up becoming destructive and debilitating. There was absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing, comfortable about my Outward Bound experience. But I was completely transformed as a person and as a leader as a result. I learned so many new skills while I was in the Appalachian Trail, like navigating on land and water, tying knots, setting up campsites, cooking, canoeing, portaging, you name it. And another set of skills that I learned developed my leadership abilities. For instance, I had to learn how to communicate and set boundaries with a racist group mate. Of course, I could have done without her presence and her negative energy, of course. But looking back, I can say that learning how to address my issues with her helped start to develop my communicative skills that I would need for my future social justice advocacy. Moreover, our overall group dynamic helped reveal to me that I have a strength in empowering and uplifting others, modeling the importance of optimism and faith. So in some ways, Outward Bound definitely helped me develop the courage that it would take to confront social issues and mobilize the strength of communities to correct systems of oppression. So when I was looking through my journal, I was reminded of a healthy habit that I had picked up throughout this entire process. And that was that I was setting goals for myself almost every single day and reflecting on whether or not I had achieved the goals and giving myself positive feedback and encouragement. As a fourth year in college, that is very motivating to see just how determined Outward Bound Tasia was in mastering the arts of self-reflection, identifying problems and solutions, and addressing problems moving forward and adapting to changing circumstances. All of these skills work together to help develop and deepen my sense of overall self-awareness. Outward Bound taught me how to be real with myself, how to learn from my mistakes, and how to apply those lessons moving forward. As a result of this routine self-reflection, I was able to go from having virtually no hiking experience before the start of this trip and being deathly afraid of heights to leading 6 to 8 hour hikes for the group while still being deathly afraid of heights. This meant that I was leading a group of 12 backpackers up narrow cliffs and mountainsides, sometimes that were over 4,000 feet above sea level, all while wearing a 60-plus pound backpack. Did I mention deathly afraid of heights? So I would have never imagined myself accomplishing such things, but it simply would not have been possible without pushing myself beyond my comfort zone and believing in my ability to achieve my goals and dreams. And believing in God to not let me die out there in them woods, y'all. So as I wrap up my story, I just wanted to share one little excerpt from the second to last day of my trip. It reads, all right, let's see how this goes with the microphone now. Okay. It reads, "It wasn't that bad. I survived to tell the story." And this brings me to my final lesson, lesson number 4. In the wise, wise words of Kelly Clarkson, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Overall, Outward Bound was proven to be one of my most difficult and most rewarding experiences of my entire life, similarly to how I'll view my time at the University of Virginia after graduation this year. When I graduate this May, I'll be able to say that I completed a global virtual internship in Nigeria, that I taught an undergraduate class on prison abolition, that I grieved the loss of a friend, that I got my first ever C on a report card, C+, all right? That I studied abroad in Kenya, that I completed a 50-page thesis, and that I spoke at Double Take. So all of these accomplishments, all of these goals and dreams that I've achieved, all of these hardships and hurdles that I've had to overcome have helped mold me into a woman that fights for a better tomorrow. But my Appalachian adventure helped mold me into the woman that I am today. And I'm so, so grateful for the opportunity to share those lessons with you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Timmy Longo. I'm 10 years old. I want to invite you back to 1972 for just a couple minutes. I was 10. But before we go there, I want to give you some context as to why my brain took me back to 10 years old just a couple weeks ago. So my lovely bride turned 59 this year, and she said, I'd like to go to dinner, and so me and 3 of the kids, we went to this restaurant in Stonefield. It's called Matchbox. Now, I immediately went to the Matchbox that I was familiar with for you older folks in the room. Maybe you had some Matchbox. They were these great little cars. And they came in these really cool colors. You remember them? And I would snap the tracks together, and I'd run my cars with loops and hills. And I thought to myself, one of these days, I want to have me one of these cars. I want to be something, and I want to have me one of these cars. And it reminded me how simple life was when I was 10, and how old I am now. I don't even think they sell Matchbox anymore. So we walked out of the restaurant, and my mind snapped back to 2023 and all the stuff we're dealing with today. And my phone buzzed. It buzzes a lot. And so I looked at it. It was one of those CNN alerts, and something tragic had happened, and something truly did. That afternoon, a Baltimore era had come to an end. One of the greatest third basemen in the history of baseball had lost his life. He died at 86 years old. He was number 5. He was the human vacuum cleaner. His name was Brooks Robinson. Those of you who are much younger than me may never have heard the name Brooks Robinson. Brooks Robinson was Baltimore, or as we say it back home, Balmer. He was Balmer through and through. He lived it and he breathed it. And he did it with grace and humility and kindness. He did it with love of the game, and he did it with love of people. So when I went home that night, I laid in bed, I thought about Brooks Robinson. I thought about Balmer. And I thought about someone else. It's what brought me back to 10 years old. His name was Jim Palmer. Another name from the past you young folks may not remember, but number 22 was probably one of the greatest pitchers in Major League Baseball in the 1970s. In the 1972 Baltimore Orioles, I would venture to guess that one of the most pivotal players in the game back then, and perhaps even now, was the pitcher. Now, I don't play a lot of baseball, but I know this. Games are won and lost from the pitcher's mound. And so in the 4th grade, in the spring of my 4th grade year, I decided I was going to run for a position in student government. It was a really important position. It was called the Assembly Coordinator. And so I would be that guy that would get to call the shots for the assemblies, right? I would get to plan the assemblies. I would get to tell people what to do to set up for the assemblies. And I was going to be the assembly coordinator. And I was going to be, hands down, the best assembly coordinator that there ever was. And so when I stepped up to the podium to give my campaign speech, I made a promise. I promised that at our first assembly that fall, I would get Jim Palmer to come and speak to us. Now, let me tell you something. The crowd did not laugh. They roared. They were like, yes! And look, honestly, as I stand here today, I have no idea who was running against me, but they were crushed. They were dead in the water. Their political career was gone. Timmy Longo, front and center. I was going to go down in history. The fame, I couldn't stand it until I walked away from that podium thinking to myself, what did you just do? And so the weeks went by, spring became summer, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know Jim Palmer. Jim Palmer does not know me. I don't know anybody that knows Jim Palmer. So if I'm nothing, I'm courageous. I picked up the phone and I called the front office of the Baltimore Orioles. And I don't know who answered the phone, but somebody did, and I told him my story. And what a story I told. And there was silence. And the guy on the other end said, well, you really got yourself in something, didn't you, boy? I said, yes, sir, I did, but you got to help. Let me see what I can do. Fast forward, it's September. It's the day of the first assembly, and the assembly coordinator is sweating bullets. I'm pacing the courtyard of St. William York Elementary School. And I had reason to believe that the guy on the phone was going to come through. But I'm just praying Jim Palmer is going to come down out of the sky in a parachute and save my rear end. But it wasn't a parachute, it was a Ford Thunderbird. When he pulled into the parking lot, 6'2" of him, I think. Handsome devil that he was, there he was, Jim Palmer, number 22. And he got out of the car with this big smile on his face. And I thought to myself, what a guy. What a guy. You know, it sounds like a criticism, and I don't mean it to be, but I look at professional athletes today, and I really search to find humility. I can't imagine somebody today answering that call, let alone showing up. But he did. And he did it with grace. And he did it with kindness. He gave of himself and he gave of his time. And he stood at the front of that auditorium. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a rock star. I did this. And I'm never going to forget it. He spent an hour with us, an hour of his time. He shook hands, he talked to kids, he signed those little, they were larger than baseball cards, but smaller than portraits. To Tim, Jim Palmer, and he drove off. I don't know that he realized what he left behind. But here's what he left behind. A really important message for a 10-year-old. That every once in a while, the 60-year-old will remember. When you make a promise, deliver. When you deliver, don't forget where you came from. Be humble. Be kind. Be thoughtful. That's what I remember. I don't know what he thought when he drove away, but I know what I thought. And I'll remember it forever. That's my story.
Greetings, my name is Juan Diego Ricardo Wade. I often have to ponder when I introduce myself because I carry so many roles in the community. Former school board member, mentor, volunteer, and currently vice mayor of the great city of Charlottesville. But I think I would like to be best known as a Christian, as a father, and as a husband of my wife, Claudette Grant, for over 30 years. We actually met here at UVA, right across the street at the A School, when we were both seeking our master's in urban planning. We're honored that we can stay in this community now and serve and give back. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. 3 boys and 3 girls, 6 of us total, big family. I like to tell the people that we were the Black Brady Bunch. So if you're not familiar with that, you can look it up. And if you're even further curious, I'm Bobby, okay? So we didn't have an Alice, we had chores. So I had a wonderful, wonderful childhood. Of course, I had many, always had playmates because we had a big family, but always lived in neighborhoods and places where there were plenty of children to play. In the summer times, we could play from can't see morning to can't see night and just come home and then do it all over again. Wonderful childhood, and we remain close today. They all live in the greater Richmond area. They said I got Hasidic and I moved away. It's like an hour away, so it's not too far. My father was a preacher. He was a teacher in Richmond Public Schools for nearly 40 years, and he was a musician. So he kind of put all those things together, and he created a gospel singing group with the 6 of us. We were called the Chromatic Waiters. And probably through our entire childhood, it wasn't a small country church between Maryland and South Carolina that we didn't sing at on the weekends. And I know what you're thinking, like, why? I didn't know he's saying, why isn't he touring with Taylor Swift, right? I know you're thinking about that, Jim. So, I recall, when we, were singing, my father would be up there, kind of having, us to sing loud, but to me, I'm over in the corner, his pinky was going like, except for you, you shh. That's okay. That's okay. I love the process. I know that I can't sing, but I love to sing, as I tell my wife on Sunday mornings. But my mother made our outfits, so she made all of our clothes that we sang going up and down the road, and we would go up and down 95 and 85 to these different places, and the side of our van had the chromatic waiters, and our logo was a family that sings together, clings together. And I know my father, he's in heaven now, that he's looking down, he's happy about that. Our mother would make our clothes for us, and I remember her coming upstairs and us getting the measurements and her cutting out the patterns and sewing. I just love that process of seeing my mom sew and put things together. And she taught me how to crochet. And that is something that I've been doing now for nearly 35 years, is crocheting. And I like to think that crocheting, it kind of represents my style of leadership in the community and my style of servant, which is kind of bringing different people, different ideas and things together to create this beautiful thing that I call community. Believe it or not, I started to crochet when I first got in this community because I was bored. I didn't have anything else to do. Free time, remember that, Claudette? We used to have free time. But now I crochet because it allows me to think clearer. It allows me to relax. It calms me. And because of my church, Olivet Presbyterian, it allows me to give back. And let me explain that. We have this ministry at our church called the Shawl Ministry. And we get together once a month, a group of members of the church, and I'm the only male there, surprisingly, and we sew, or we either knit or crochet, and during that time, man, we laugh, we advise, we exchange recipe, we bring recipes, and I see Barbara here. Barbara, those molasses cookies you brought, they were delicious. So we have some members from our Shawl Ministry here. Thank you all so much for your ongoing support. And so we get together, and as we end, it's a couple hours we get together, we take the completed items that we have finished. We have a table in the parlor at our church, and we place them on the table, the items on the table. And then we get on our knees. And then we lay our hands on those items, and we pray. We pray a simple prayer, which essentially says we want this items, which we are making for those in the community that may be unhoused, newborns in the community, the sick, the shut in. We get on our knees, we lay our hands on those items, and we pray this simple prayer, which essentially to bring love, to bring comfort, to bring peace to those that are receiving it. And so since we're at a school, I do have show and tell, and I have one that I have recently completed that we'll be praying on, Barbara and Lynette, at our next meeting. This is one that I've made and we'll be praying on, and someone in our community will get this. And I have to say that this particular one was created. My dear counselor Leah here doing many meetings over the last few months discussing the zoning ordinance, which is a big issue right now in Charlottesville. So some of these might be a little bit tense than others. But I see Hosea here too, a planning commission. So, but it still will have the same love and comfort that it was intended to be. So that is me, that's my story. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
All right, folks, thanks. That's the end of the storytelling hour. I want to thank President Ryan and Katie Ryan for hosting this every year. And can we just give one huge round of applause to these storytellers in the front row? I'm giving a standing ovation for these people. They are amazing.